Hello and welcome. This is the Black Ponderer and I'm the host, Neil Trotter. And today, in this video, we're going to be talking about some political philosophy. I know. I mean, there's people who are in the field of philosophy who study philosophy and they're not really cool with politics and philosophy. I mean, political philosophy is a very important branch in philosophy, very significant, very robust. But there's people out there, I've gotten comments, get politics out of my philosophy. But I think maybe a lot of us can agree that if serious philosophy was more ingrained or taken into account with our politics, I think that we would be living in a more sensible world. Looking at the politics of today and the lack of philosophy, yeah, I think we can all maybe agree that integration of serious philosophy would help in that situation. So I'm going to do my part to help in that integration and kind of make political philosophy cool and important to talk about. And we're going to do that via this work right here. We're going to be talking about the Anarchist Cookbook. So we're talking about anarchism. Now, you may have heard of an Anarchist Cookbook that is basically a guide to creating bombs and things like that. Molotov cocktails. That's not what this is. This is basically like the replacement of that old school book, the Anarchist Cookbook. This was written by a founder and also some other people, but primarily a founder of Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs is anarchist, activist, nonviolent movement, right? Like anti-bomb movement. There's no teaching you how to build bombs in this Anarchist Cookbook. It's more of a guide to what true anarchism is, right? And a lot of it has to do with nonviolence, right? And so that's what I want to talk about. Now, I want, again, like what we do at the Black Ponderer, we read quotes from the book. And there's actually a quote from the guy who wrote the original Anarchist Cookbook, the one where you're learning how to build bombs and stuff. It was written by a Vietnam veteran, but he regrets that. The author of the original Anarchist Cookbook, he regrets writing that book. And he's saying, like, if you're gonna read an Anarchist Cookbook, read this one. It's a lot better. And I'll read you a quote right here. It's like part of the introduction. The author of the original Anarchist Cookbook, and his name is William Powell. Okay, he writes, the illogical notion that violence could be used to prevent violence. I had fallen for the same irrational pattern of thought that led to U.S. military involvement in both Vietnam and Iraq. The irony is not lost on me. To paraphrase Aristotle, famous philosopher, it is easy to be angry, but to be angry with the right person, at the right time, and to the right degree, that is hard. That is the hallmark of a civilized person. Right? Easy to be angry, right? But to channel that anger into something that's constructive results in meaningful progress that helps civilization move forward. That's what anarchism is about, right? And so the book is pushing the notion that true anarchism is nonviolent. And in case you had that book, I forgot to give the page number. That was page Roman numeral V, Roman numeral 5, because it's the introduction, right? They use the Roman numerals. And it's like the bottom of the first column of the page. And this book is online for free. So again, Food Not Bombs is an anarchist movement. So anarchism, rejection of a hierarchy, and we'll get into that, right? Which includes like copyright, right? True anarchism is opposed to copyright. So this is free. You can just download this, or you can, buy it on the website to support the movement, or get it wherever you want. But let's move forward with some more quotes, okay? So anarchism, what is it and what it isn't? This is chapter 1. And I'm going to read you here on the first page, page 1. This is the top of the second column. The identification of anarchism with chaos, mindless rebellion, absurdity such as primitivism, and antisocial attitudes and behaviors such as amoral egotism has 3 primary undesired effects. 1, it allows people to easily dismiss anarchism and anarchists. 2, it makes it much more difficult to explain anarchism to them. because they already think that they know what it is and have rejected it. And 3, it attracts a fair number of what the Italian anarchist Luigi Fabbri, hopefully I pronounced that right, calls empty-headed and frivolous types, and occasionally outright sociopaths whose words and actions tend to further discredit anarchism. Okay, so there's misconceptions, right? What is anarchism? Oh, it's a promotion of lawlessness and like a lack of order and like just like complete chaos, right? And I will say that's what I thought anarchism was before I joined the movement Food Not Bombs. I'm a member of Food Not Bombs, so that gave me a solid grounding of, oh, okay, so this is actual anarchism, which is great, right? So it's not any of those things. It's not chaos. It's not egotism. It's not rejection of morals, right? That's not what the anarchism is, right? But we're gonna break it down. We're gonna break it down. Okay, so the book continues. What anarchism isn't? So anarchism is not terrorism. What does that mean? It acknowledges that means determine ends. Terrorism is inherently vanguardist, and that even when successful, it almost always leads to bad results, all right? So the idea that, oh, okay, we'll just blow up this facility, right? Because that facility needs to be blown up. It has to be blown, it has to go. But the issue is, but now you're promoting the blowing up things up. Now, it depends. We'll get into that. Sometimes getting rid of a property can be good. Can be good if the property promotes oppression, very terrible discrimination. Sometimes that is necessary, right? But it's not like wholesale, just like flat out like blowing up people, taking out individuals, destroying buildings that have, human lives in it. The destruction of life is what I'm talking about. When you normalize that, even for good ends, you're normalizing the destruction of life, which anarchism is opposed to that, like the anarchism that's discussed in this book. Right? So let's continue. There's a quote here that from this anonymous author who wrote, "You can't blow up a social relationship." The anarchist case against terrorism, right? The quote is, "The total collapse of this society would provide no guarantee about what replaced it. Unless a majority of people had the ideas and organizations sufficient for the creation of an alternative society, we would see the old world reassert itself because it is what people would be used to, what they believed in, what existed unchallenged in their own personalities." So, what that's saying is, you destroy a violent society using violence, is just going to result in in an equal or even more violent society, because you're not providing like an alternative way of operating society. It's just using violence to solve violence. And so you're left with just more violence, right? There needs to be an alternative to that. Some other way of organizing society. Now we're on page 2. This is the last paragraph of the first column. "This is not to say that armed resistance is never appropriate. Like I was saying, clearly there are situations in which one has little choice, as when facing a dictatorship that suppresses civil liberties and prevents one from acting openly, which has happened repeatedly in many countries. Even then, armed resistance should be taken reluctantly and as a last resort, because violence is inherently undesirable due to the suffering it causes, because it provides repressive regimes excuses for further repression, because it provides them with the opportunity to commit atrocities against civilians and to blame those atrocities on their terrorist opponents, and because, as history has shown, the chances of success are very low." A well-meaning, right, a group of people are like oppressed violently, and they're like, okay, we're gonna like free ourselves through violence. And then the people who are using violence to oppress, they're like, hey, look at these rogue people, they're using violence. You don't want these people to violently cause chaos. See, that's why we gotta violently oppress them, right? You see this in news all the time, this delegitimizing activist groups who use violence to fight oppressive powers. News organizations controlled by those in power as like, hey, look at those rogue people, they're killing innocent law enforcement agents. You know, we need to, that's why we're violently oppressing these people, because that's the only language they understand, right? You know, and that's what that quote is talking about. I'll continue here. Even though armed resistance may sometimes be called for in repressive situations, it's a far different matter to succumb to the romance of the gun and to engage in urban guerrilla warfare in relatively open societies in which civil liberties are largely intact and in which one does not have mass popular support at the start of one's violent campaign. Violence in such situations does little but drive the public into the protective arms of the government. Narrow political dialogue, tending to polarize the populace into pro and anti-guerrilla factions, turn politics into a spectator sport for the vast majority of people, provide the government with an excuse to suppress civil liberties, and induce the onset of repressive regimes better able to handle the terrorist problem than their more tolerant predecessors. It's also worth mentioning that the chances of success of such violent vanguardist campaigns are microscopic. They are simply arrogant, ill-thought-out roads to disaster. A group of activists is like, oh, we're gonna blow this motherfucker up. You know, let's blow him up. All right, and then they start doing it, right? And then, you know, you see on Fox News or even CNN, right? Or like one of these centrist or like left-wing media groups, they'll show like, look at these wild anarchists or these activists doing terrorist acts. They're eco-terrorists, you know, and so what does that do for the general public? It's like, oh yeah, they gotta be, we gotta take these people out, right? And of course you're seeing all the powerful people who oppress, they're like, see, I told you, that's why we use extreme violence to get rid of these people. And that's why we have to use extreme violence, right? And it's just like adding fuel to the fire. And then it says like, hey, don't get caught up in that romance of like, oh yes, like we need to militarize and like, you know, go guns blazing, Rambo style, you know, Death Wish, you know, Charles Branson, I think is an actor. Spaghetti Western style, Clint Eastwood, all guns blazing, I'm the hero. That like, it's a romance, but it is not really thought through as in terms of like, okay, how do we actually change this? Not temporarily, but more long term. Okay, we're on page 3. This is the end of the first paragraph. For over a century and a half, anarchists have been arguing that coercive hierarchical organizations as embodied in government and corporations is not equivalent to organization per se, which they regard as necessary, and that coercive organization should be replaced by decentralized, non-hierarchical organization based on voluntary cooperation and mutual aid. This is hardly a rejection of organization. So yeah, it's trying to say that, hey, you know, anarchism is not like a rejection of like organization. We're not, when you say true anarchism isn't about like, you know, free roam to do anything, you know, no order whatsoever, right? No, it's about that coercive, domineering, suppressive, discriminatory type of hierarchical authority. That needs to be going away for a more communal, non-hierarchical, like horizontal structure of leadership where like everybody is a leader at some stage. So this is page 3 and we're at the second column. This is the end of the section here. In the United States, the once exceedingly useful term libertarian has been hijacked by egotists who are in fact enemies of liberty in the full sense of the word and who have very little in common with anarchists. So that's, you know, it brings that up because back in the old school days, before like anarchism was a term used to define this political philosophy, people associate themselves as socialist libertarians. Like Oscar Wilde used that term to associate himself with these kinds of values. But nowadays, like, libertarian is not anarchist at all, right? It just goes into that. People who consider themselves libertarian, they often associate themselves with notions of free markets. You know, they're very big in state law. They embrace hierarchical authority. They're often very pro-capitalist, right? And these things have nothing to do with anarchism. So that's what's being said there. Now we go to this section. We're still on page 3. What anarchism is, right? So this is the last paragraph, page 3. Most anarchists use the term anarchism in a much broader sense, defining it as the rejection of coercion and domination in all forms. So most anarchists reject not only coercive government, but also religion and capitalism, which they see as other forms of the twin evils, domination and coercion. First of all, opposing religion. Why? Because religion uses hierarchical structures to like enforce authority. You know, for example, in the United States, right? You know, there's this notion of separation of church and state, which is not a thing that exists in the United States. Right? Church and religious authority absolutely determine a lot of how people function, even though they don't necessarily believe in religion, but they still are subject to the authority. And we see that all over the place. We see that with this anti-LGBTQ law enforcement that's going on. In the city where I live in Tennessee, transgender kids can no longer receive gender-affirming health care. That's totally influenced by religion, right? And of course, abortion's illegal here in the state, except for very, very small circumstances, which are like almost nobody falls into who needs an abortion, right? And that's totally religiously inspired, right? And the list goes on, right? And these laws are enforced through coercion and domination, right? And of course, like with capitalism, same situation, coercion. You know, capitalism operates on an exploitative model. You know, basic resources like shelter, food, water. You have to get a job to survive, right? You have to help in producing capital for companies or corporations, right? If you don't, you literally can't survive. You won't be able to afford to live or eat or drink water or clean water, right? So it's all coercion and domination. Hence why like anarchism rejects those broad categories. All right, so we're on page 4, this last paragraph of the first column. Anarchists believe in freedom in both its negative and positive senses. Oh. In this country, freedom is routinely presented only in its negative sense, that of being free from restraint. Hence, most people equate freedom only with such things as freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of or from religion. But there's also a positive aspect of freedom, an aspect which anarchists almost alone insist on. That positive aspect is what Emma Goldman called the freedom to. And that freedom, the freedom of action, the freedom to enjoy or use, is highly dependent upon access to the world's resources. Because of this, the rich are in a very real sense free to a much greater degree than the rest of us. Okay, so now we're getting like, it's going deep in philosophy. You know, negative freedom versus positive freedom. This is very philosophical, right? We're talking like, oh, the freedom of speech, because like, oh, you're blocking my ability to say things, you're negatively impacting my freedom. But anarchism also focuses on like, well, what about positive freedoms? Like, you know, the freedom for an education, right? I want to get a college education. I want higher learning, right? But, you know, at least here in the United States, like that is just not an option for many people because they don't have the money, because higher education is so damn expensive. And also, honestly, a lot of public education is just there's so much resource lacking. Very little money goes to like public education versus other forms of where money goes to, like tax money, for instance. Like huge amounts of money goes into the police force, but very little of that percentage goes to like education. So, you know, even at the elementary level, like people don't have access to education. They're not free to learn, right? You know, also the banning of books here in the United States. You know, the banning of books at public schools related to like race and LGBTQ plus issues, because you can't learn about that stuff. Well, what about maybe I want to learn about it? Well, No, we're not learning about that. And so there's this positive freedom that's denied us as well, right? And anarchism is saying, okay, that's important too, that these type of things that we don't think about, that we should think about, this aspect of freedom. Okay, we're in the middle of the second column, page 4. To put this in general terms, because they do not have to work, the rich not only have far more money, that is access to resources, but also far more time to pursue their interests, pleasures, and desires than do the rest of us. You may or may not know, most wealth is generated via intergenerationally, right? Most wealth is inherited. Like, there's very few wealth that's actually like earned through like working, right? And so when you inherit a lot of money, you don't have to work for it. You don't have to put time to like work to get money. So you have money to just do stuff that you like to do, right? You can create and develop things and like just sit down and formulate ideas and write philosophical essays. Whereas somebody who doesn't have much money, they don't have the time or freedom or energy to do that. They gotta go to work and like pay the bills. And nowadays it's becoming more and more of the thing. Like, people are spending more and more hours working. The cost of living continues to go up. So for like the average person, like, they don't have the freedom to like create things because they're too busy working to survive. Whereas the riches, they don't have that problem, so they have this freedom to do whatever the hell they want, right? And so anarchism talks about that, or addresses that issue. This is the last paragraph of page 4. This greater freedom of action for the rich comes at the expense of everyone else, through the diminishment of everyone else's freedom of action. There's no way around this, given that freedom of action is to a great extent determined by access to finite resources. And now we're on page 5, second paragraph. Because the primary goal of anarchism is the greatest possible amount of freedom for all, anarchists insist on equal freedom in both its negative and positive aspects. That, in the negative sense, individuals be free to do whatever they wish as long as they do not harm or directly intrude upon others. And in the positive sense, that all individuals have equal freedom to act, that they have equal access to the world's resources. I'll just continue here. Anarchists recognize that absolute freedom is an impossibility. Okay. Is not naive about that. That's very important. That a moral egotism ignoring the rights of others would quickly devolve into a war of all against all. What we argue for is that everyone have equal freedom from restraint, limited only by respect for the rights of others, and that everyone have as nearly as possible equal access to resources, thus ensuring equal or near equal freedom to act. This is anarchism in a theoretical sense, like in a philosophical sense. So what are you saying there? Yeah, it's just saying like, because people will throw out these fringe examples. It's like, well, what about like the freedom of a pedophile? A pedophile wants to, have access to like young children, and should we let them free that? Should we let them have freedom to that? It's like, no, like, let's be sensible. Right? And people will use fringe examples of that and, take your pick. Because first of all, you're infringing the rights of the child, right, by doing that. So you have to be sensible about this too. But what you could do, if we're using that fringe example, and then you could use many others, you could say with the pedophile, it's like, okay, you clearly have a mental problem. There's a mental problem happening. You need to get help. We're going to give you free mental health care so you can like figure it out what the hell's going on with you and why you're attracted to children in that way, and get some counseling, and we should freedom to do that, but not freedom to infringe on other people's freedom and like to take theirs away, right? So that's like freedom of access to resources, which honestly maybe the pedophile didn't have. Right? They didn't have access to counseling, mental health care, education, those kinds of things, so that they didn't get that help, which resulted in that negative thing happening. So anarchism is sensible in that way. So let's go more in depth with the notion that anarchism is a nonviolent philosophy. Here we are on page 7. It's another chapter. This chapter, you can't blow up a social relationship. Yeah, it kind of addresses the whole Marxist-Leninist type of idea that, oh, we got to militarize the working class, the proletariat. We need to arm them so we can rise up and fight the power through violent means, right? And this book argues, well, anarchism isn't about that. That's why we distance ourselves from like Marxist-Leninist philosophy and that kind of thing. So it says here, this is the third paragraph, page 7. Guerrillaism relies upon the capitalist media for much of its impact, presenting political acts as spectacles divorced from the day-to-day lives of ordinary people, reducing them to passive spectators, while providing the corporate media with a perfect opportunity to frighten the public into the protective arms of the state. To put it another way, guerrillas presume to act for the people, attempting to substitute individual acts of mass actions, thus perpetuating the division between leaders and followers, in this case, vanguardists and spectators. All right. And it's just talking about guerrilla warfare, which like anarchism opposes. It argues that the media just uses these kinds of activists who like go out and blow things up and take out people, even though there may be bad people like oppressors or like capitalists or like elitists. They take them out in violent ways. The media will just be like, hey, look at these guys. They're like destroying a society. We don't want this. Let's fund the law enforcement. Let's give them more money so that they can blow them up even harder. And then the general public is like just watching all this and like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. You shouldn't be doing all that, right? And this is the phenomena that you see throughout history. You see this play out, and it's reflective of the nature of violence. Violence just reiterates itself, which is like the sad truth of violence. That's how violence operates. It's a downward spiral. Like if violence happens to you and then you reciprocate with more violence, it just gets worse and worse and worse. It doesn't solve the problem. It just goes downward into like further chaos and tragedy, despair, and oppression, right? And that's just a sad truth of the matter. And we see this in history. This is the 10th of the last line of the first column on page 9. Okay, in case you're following along. When left-wing terrorism is being carried out in a consistent way in society, it gives the state extra leverage in using political repression against individuals and the left in general. When by their own actions terrorists serve such ends, they are contributing to the destruction of politics and the closing of various options for the spreading of ideas before they have been fully utilized. Okay, like you're shutting off like nonviolent ways to solve problems, or like acts of like community mutual aid, care, non-hierarchical organizing. Like these solutions are just eliminated when guerrilla warfare is the only thing that's like prioritized. Of course, the state will readily use various repressive methods if it meets any substantial resistance, or if it has to handle a social crisis which is creating resistance. Terrorism and guerrillaism cannot be attacked just because they produce repression. Even more important is the fact that there is nothing to have made it worthwhile. In the end, the guerrillas get wiped out and there is nothing left but repression and a law and order mentality amongst the people. It happens every time throughout history, right? A developing mass movement will produce repression, but it will also produce numbers of people with clear aims and the organized means of reaching them. It will be able to build far more lasting means of armed defense. In a social crisis in which all sorts of positive developments begin, a separate guerrilla or terrorist group dashing about creating ultimately irrelevant confrontations concentrates political debate in too narrow a compass. Have they, government or guerrillas, gone too far, etc., instead of should the workers have occupied these facilities, etc. Terrorism and guerrillaism destroy politics, right? And that's like violence. The problem with violence is that, yeah, you're not, it gets away philosophy. That's why philosophy is so important. like, or theory is more important. Because, like, first of all, you're thinking like, okay, you know, first of all, you devolve yourself in military tactics. It's like, okay, how can we effectively blow this person up? And then it just starts getting into like, you're just thinking about how to more effectively enforce violence to win, right? But then you got the spectators, the people outside looking like, okay, this has gone long enough. We need to like destroy it all, you know. And so like, you know, it gives fuel to like media outlets that are controlled by those in power, the elite class, the richest, wealthiest capitalists. You know, it just gives them fuel. Like, look at these guys. They're just destroying the country. Like, we need to do something about this. And it's like, yeah, like this is horrible, right? You know, the people who are just watching, as opposed to like, well, why are they fighting in the first place? Like, what is the reason why they're taking up arms, right? Like, nobody's thinking about that, right? Maybe because they have no resources at all, and maybe we should start funding those resources, or like providing that kind of access for more people. Maybe this kind of stuff wouldn't happen, this violence wouldn't occur to begin with. But the problem with like this kind of terrorist or like burn it all down is like you're not like putting enough thought into like constructive ways of actually solving the problem. It's like, it's not enough root cause analysis. And it's not even like, I guess you could say root cause analysis, but it's not enough actual effort into like addressing the core problem. Okay, I guess that's what root cause analysis is. But and that's what ultimately you're just playing into the elitist game, right? That's what they want. They want to have, the elitists want an enemy that they can fight because ultimately they have more resources than us. Us, I mean like the working class. Okay, this is page 11. This is the middle of the first column. The very act of taking up arms may defy the law, but it says nothing about what is being fought for. Okay? The essence of revolution is not armed confrontation with the state, but the nature of the movement which backs it up. And this will depend on the kinds of relationships and ideas amongst people in the groups, community councils, workers' councils, etc. that emerge in the social conflict. The job for revolutionaries is not to take up the gun, but to engage in the long, hard work of publicizing and understanding of this society. We must build a movement which links the many problems and issues people face with the need for revolutionary change, which attacks all the pseudo-solutions, both individual and social, offered within this society, which seeks to demystify those solutions offered by the authoritarian left, and instead to place the total emphasis on the need for self-activity and self-organization on the part of those people willing to take up issues. We need to present ideas about socialism based on equality and freedom. That was a more eloquently put way of what I just said. Right. Let me go to, okay, this is the second column, the bottom of the second paragraph. If people do not want to see repeated again and again the old pattern of the revolution placing in power a new group of oppressors, then they will have to realize that the responsibility for a new society rests with them. They will have to think about how to structure this new society so that it remains democratic. So yeah, what's saying there is like the problem with the guerrilla warfare or guerrillaism. It creates like spectators and like a vanguard. Like, okay, we know what to do. We're gonna take up arms and we're gonna fight the power. Like, the false idea is that, oh, we're gonna militarize everybody and then everybody's gonna take up arms. So that's rarely what happens, if at all, right? Particularly in countries where, like what was said before, where like there's civil liberties are still like kind of, they exist in some form or fashion, right? Like the United States of America, we still have that. I can still make a YouTube video and call it the Anarchist Cookbook, and I have the freedom to do that. Now, will this video be monetized? No, right? Because of that, but I can still put it up, right? And so because of that, like, you're still gonna have spectators, people like you watching the video. And so for those people like you you're watching the video, it's about like getting you involved. And how do I get you involved is, well, I'm not just gonna hand you a gun and be like, okay, let's go, we're gonna rise up. It's like, no, let's figure out a way to do this that's nonviolent. And there is a way to do this which is nonviolent. And I'm talking, when I say do this, I'm talking about ending the oppression of the elitist class, making education more accessible, making healthcare more accessible, these kinds of problems, dealing with climate change, right? These kinds of problems, right? There are ways we can do that don't have anything to do with like taking up arms and like going out and taking out the capitalists, right? Because ultimately that doesn't work. Okay, let's continue. This is page 14, the end of the first paragraph. Oppression is maintained by consent, and that violence is a secondary phenomenon. Right, it's the notion that violence is okay. Like, yeah, we should be taking up arms, right? So it's that, and it's just like staying on the sidelines and being like, okay, y'all do this. Like, I don't want to involve myself in this at all. And that's kind of a form of consent too. All right, and that's kind of the state where, the country where I live, the United States of America. A lot of people are just like, hey man, the world is fucked up. There's people out there fighting, doing these riots, and I'm not trying to be part of that. I'm just trying to get mine, buy my little house, get my little car, build my picket fence, and y'all do y'all. And I know the world's gone to shit, but it is what it is. That's a consensual agreement that you're making. This allowance of the perpetuation of oppression, right? But now it's time for the common person, the spectator, the YouTube watcher, for example, to say like, you know what, this needs to stop. This needs to stop. What can I do to end this oppression? And there are things you can do that have nothing to do with violence, okay? Here's a quote right here. This is still the first column. We don't count on a spontaneous anti-fascist mobilization as a result of terror and fascism itself. And we know that our work produces even more pretexts for repression because we're communists. And whether communists will organize and struggle with terror and repression will produce only fear and resignation, or whether it will produce resistance, class hatred, and solidarity depends on the response to the repression. So how are we going to respond to this? This is a moment right now, and this quote refers to like past things that happened in the 70s and the 50s. I mean, oppression, state oppression and state discrimination has been an ongoing thing ever since states existed, right? And it's continuing to happen today. So what is our response? And so anarchism pushes people to make a decision, like, okay, how are we going to respond to this? That's important. Now, I skip down a few lines. They ignore the actual conditions, demanding that everyone else miraculously achieve their advanced consciousness when, as has already been shown, their ideas are superficial and without value and merely a rallying cry for a massacre. And again, not to beat up on Marxist-Leninists, but I mean, that's kind of what we're doing, right? The vanguardism, that kind of idea that, oh, well, we know what to do. We know what to do, and we're going to enforce our opinion onto everyone else, right? And what we need to do is we need to blow shit up, right? But that is short-sighted, and it's like caught up in this romanticism, like, oh yeah, this glory, the glory of the revolution, this bloody revolution that's going to happen. And it's like, okay, but what after that, what then? After that, right? Okay, here's some more quotes. This is page 15. And this is the middle of the first column. The revolution wouldn't be built through political work, but through headlines, through appearances in the press. This overestimation of the press, that's where it completely falls apart. Not only do they have to imitate the machine completely and fall into the trap of only getting into it politically with the police, but their only justification comes through the media. They establish themselves only by these means. The old saying, the revolution will not be televised. When you're seeing, that kind of anarchism, that kind of guerrilla warfare being televised and then used to prop up state violence, that's the phenomenon that demonstrates why this way of fighting the power doesn't work. Also I like to bring up, like, there's a lot of non-violent positive actions against state oppression that you never see. You never see them. And the common argument is like, well, it's because they're not working. It's like, well, I would beg to differ. It's because by promoting those successes, it takes away fuel that the state power needs to continue to oppress. If people start seeing like, oh, okay, there's actually nonviolent ways we can help people, right, and empower all people, the state is like, oh shit, no, we can't show that. We can't show that because we can only show that violence is the answer, right? Because that's the foundation that they operate on. This is especially absurd given the role of the most popular news sources in stimulating and maintaining the most irrational elements in people's response to acts of political violence. They deliberately try to obscure political issues by omission and commission. And here we are, we're on page 15 still. This is second column, third paragraph. The media seek to obscure politics further by treating incidents as spectacles. This does suit the apolitical nature of guerrilla strategy, in which their struggle is supposed to take on bigger and bigger proportions in the media in order to call forth a ruling class response. The real effect among the people, however, is to confirm the idea that politics is a removed realm to be viewed passively, usually as dreary routine, but occasionally as a spectacle. Even if people support the guerrillas, this hardly has any real meaning in terms of their own involvement in politics. Instead, the usual result is to provide an organizing base of vicious attitudes for the rulers to exploit for their ends. So what's important here is that, yeah, everybody needs to be politically involved. And again, that's why I'm pushing political philosophy, right? And when people are like, no, I don't want the politics to be involved in my philosophy, you're disengaging and you're letting the world just burn while you passively look. We got to stop. Like, that's enabling the world to continue to burn. You got to involve yourselves in politics. And that doesn't necessarily mean participating in like state government, right? Or even municipal government, right? That's what anarchism is. There's like a non-hierarchical way to be political that actually makes change, right? Positive change. I mean, we're gonna jump down to the last paragraph. People's response is, on the whole, genuine moral outrage. This is manipulated into law and order hysteria, which allows legislation to be passed and the left to be crushed. But it is typical of the elitism of many passive leftists lacking in principled ideas who sycophantically devote themselves to any active cause somewhere else, carried out by someone else, to pour contempt to the reactions of people to real outrages. Yeah, we're seeing this type of, libertarianism or neoliberalism, right? All these terms people use. I think in the Europe and like United Kingdom, like, austerity is a word that's kind of used a lot to identify this kind of passive leftist political disengagement that's like a pseudo engagement, non-profit industrial complex, right? All these references to what is being talked about here. So this is page 17 and we are on the second column here. This is the beginning of the section here. The very essence of libertarian revolutionary strategy is the idea that there is an inextricable link between the means used and the ends produced. I skipped down 2 paragraphs. The aim here would not be to carry out exemplary clashes with the military, but to protect the political infrastructure to enable the spreading of ideas to continue. This may involve some guerrilla tactics, but it cannot mean the strategy of guerrillaism. Nor can it mean the creation of a separate hierarchical military organization, which is not only anti-libertarian, but is also vulnerable and inefficient, right? So often like guerrilla warfare just results in another oppressive regime. So the book argues like, okay, stop doing that. Maybe some guerrilla tactics may be necessary, right, in like extreme circumstances, right? But overall, we need to not devolve into another hierarchical structure of oppression. And here's page 18, the bottom of the second column. Proponents of terrorism and guerrillaism are to be opposed because their actions are vanguardist and authoritarian, because their ideas, to the extent that they are substantial, are wrong or unrelated to the result of their actions, especially when they call themselves libertarians or anarchists, because their killing cannot be justified, and finally, because their actions produce either repression with nothing in return or an authoritarian regime. To those contemplating political violence, we say, first look at yourself. Is destructiveness an expression of fear, of love? There are political traditions and political possibilities you have yet to examine. To the society which produces the conditions of poverty, passivity, selfishness, shallowness, and destructiveness in which the response of political violence can grow, we say, take warning. These conditions must be overthrown. All right. So then, what do we do instead of violence? Instead of arming the proletariat or militarizing the working class to revolt against the capitalists and the elitists, what should we do then? Big shot? Smarty pants? Well, I'll continue reading. We're on the page now. Revolutionary nonviolence is the answer. Revolutionary nonviolence. So let me read. This is the top of the page. Anarchy is love. Action taken by those seeking to make anarchism real. As we seek to replace coercive hierarchical organizations with positive life-affirming projects such as info shops, community gardens, worker-managed collectives, free schools, and other do-it-yourself efforts, we must organize against coercion, exploitation, and domination in all their forms. Okay, so those are things: info shops, community gardens, working managed collectives, free schools, and do-it-yourself efforts. You might say, well, we can't do that here. In the United States of America, you certainly can, because I'm a part of organizations that do that and provide excellent results. Nonviolent resistance and non-cooperation are probably the most effective ways to achieve long-lasting positive social change. To be effective, it is often necessary to have large numbers of supporters and to be persistent. Honesty and truth are your most important allies. While often difficult, compassion and respect for your opponents, combined with truth and honesty, are essential to undermining the power of even the most ruthless and inhumane institutions. All right, I'm just gonna keep going here. Nonviolence is not just a theory. It means responding to injustice with action. Nonviolence should not be confused with inaction. Withholding support and refusing to cooperate with institutions and policies of violence, exploitations, and injustice is a principal tactic of nonviolent resistance. Often the state will increase its violence if it believes your campaign is succeeding, but as repression grows, so will your support. What might seem like a month, maybe years of failure, can change suddenly. And it just gives examples of this. Yeah, so nonviolent mutual aid projects is the answer. And it gave you a list of things. I'll just give you some examples of what things that I've done through Food Not Bombs. Food Not Bombs here in the city of Memphis. We organize a mutual aid picnic, that's what we call it. We provide free food just at downtown Memphis Public Park, and we just give out free food. And not only free food, drinks, water and such, clothes, hygienic products, contraceptives, harm reduction supplies. It's just like a pantry, and it's a food pantry and just a general pantry in general that we do every week. We help lots of people. We also assist in with another group who does like the community fridges. We have refrigerators set up outside in the community in public. They're publicly accessible 24/7. They're just refrigerators that are just set up outside. You can just walk up to it. You can take food or you can put food in there. And that helps out a lot of people. I've helped build a few of those myself. I do a lot of teach-ins, where a teach-in is like basically a workshop or a seminar, but it's like out on the street, right? It's not like inside someplace. It's like in a park or a courtyard or a public place. And, you know, we talk about abolition, anarchism, nonviolence, mutual aid, and we set up a shop and we just talk to passerbyers about these things. And we talk to, you know, poor people, rich people, just anybody in the public who just wants to stop and talk. And we educate people in that way. That's what, like, what is it? Info shops, like education, accessibility. And there's real results are happening from those things. You know, we've helped lots of people and we've changed a lot of people's ideas, and you know, we've swayed a lot of people from violent efforts to like more nonviolent ways of helping people that have been more constructive than what they were doing before. And these are just examples. You know, we were actually kicked out of the park by law enforcement, but that didn't go too well publicly. Law enforcement was looking bad, and so they just let us kind of be. We've experienced that, but we've kind of overcame it because we won the court of public opinion. People are like, why are you picking on people? They're just giving free food out. And so that's what the book is saying, right? Persistence and dedication to nonviolence attracted public support. It sure did. It did with us, and it does with a lot of Food Not Bombs groups. This is a common occurrence. But I'll continue reading here. This is page 22, second paragraph. It is extremely important that we act in a manner which is consistent with our values. We want a future without violence and exploitation. Means determine ends. Okay, that's very important. It is never in our interest to use violence against the police or others. Ooh, that may be controversial, but that's our stance. Nonviolence, nonviolence, nonviolence. Campaigns of violence, even against the most unethical opponents, can be very disempowering, and even if successful, will usually install new institutions that rely on violence to protect their authority. If power changes hands after a campaign of nonviolence, it is more likely that the new institution will have popular support and maintain their power through consent of the people, you know, the court of public opinion. On the practical side, the dominant power usually can muster significantly more violent force than we can. The authorities strive to engage their opponents in realms where they have the advantage, notably armed conflict. But more philosophically, we don't want to use power for domination in our effort for social change. I skip down to the bottom of the column here. We want to create a society based upon human rights and human needs, not dependent on the threat and use of violence. We do not want to dominate. We want to seek the truth and support each other as we work to resolve conflicts without violence. A nonviolent uprising can evolve into a long-lasting change since its power comes from popular support and participation of a substantial number of people. When a government changed hands through the use of violence, the new government turned to violence to stay in power. Using violence to take power often reduces popular support and so increases the need for more violence. So we talked about that. All right. People feel threatened. They're just like, hey man, if you gotta just take them out. But if you're fighting with nonviolence, people are like, whoa, wait a minute. Why are you attacking the nonviolent people? Like, they're just helping. Now, you know, of course, you're going to have to deal with a lot of resistance. But in the long term, you're going to win people over. And I've experienced that myself, personally. Okay, this is page 24, fourth paragraph. Anarchists dedicated to nonviolent direct action are not opposed to all forms of property damage. Okay, so this is a distinction of violence versus nonviolence, okay? Listen, it can be an effective strategy if the decision to do it involves all participants. The target chosen is one that will guarantee no one who is not part of the action could be injured, and the method used does not frighten the public. If those participating also take credit and destroy property that is clearly injurious, that sends a clear message to both those who are being targeted and the public. That type of property damage can be empowering to those participating in it and can serve as an inspiration to those you want to join you. You know, the point here is like property does not equal human life, okay? You know, a lot of times people will speak about property as if it is human life, right? Oh my God, they're destroying the property. as if like it's the same thing as killing people. And sometimes like people care more about property than they do about homeless people, right? Oh, those people don't matter, but my, you know, this Target, right, or this like Starbucks, that's very important. That's more important. You know, that's another thing that's addressed. You know, I think Food Not Violence pushes forward is this idea that, hey, what's more important here, human beings or property? Now, you know, in a capitalist society, we start thinking like property is more important sometimes, right? Or a lot of the times, right? Particularly when we talk about homelessness, where it's like, man, these people are like draining the value of the real estate that they're building their encampments around. It's like that. You know, let's help them out. Like, who cares about the value of the real estate of where they're living? You know, and that's kind of where we're going with that. Let me read you a quote from the book. This is the bottom of this first column on page 24. Property damage is not necessarily violence. The firefighter breaks the door to get the people out of the building, but the husband breaks the dishes to demonstrate to his wife that he can and may also break her. It's violence displaced onto the inanimate as a threat to the animate. Quietly eradicating experimental GMO crops or pulling up mining claim stakes is generally like the firefighter. Breaking windows during a big demonstration is more like the husband. I saw the windows of a Starbucks in a Nike town broken in downtown Seattle after nonviolent direct action has shut the Central City and the World Trade Organization ministerial down. I saw scarred-looking workers and knew that the CEO and the shareholders were not going to face that turbulence, and they sure were not going to be the ones to clean it up. Economically, it meant nothing to them. Asking you to think more deeply about violence and nonviolence and property and human beings, right? I would argue that in a capitalist society, we kind of put property and human life equivalently, and what's more devastating, the destruction of property or the destruction of human life? You know, that's the question we need to think about. Anarchism is fundamentally about collective action using the non-hierarchical process of consensus in the decision-making process to include all those affected. Actions such as those taken by the Black Bloc cannot by design be agreed to by all those who are affected. Rather, they're imposed on other participants in actions. The euphemism for violence is diversity of tactics. Perhaps because diversity has been a liberal, progressive buzzword these past decades, but diversity does not mean that anything goes and that democratic decisions making doesn't apply. Okay? Yeah, it's like, hey man, sometimes violence is necessary. And it's like, okay, but you really need to think that one through. You really need to think that one through. Is it really? I mean, sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not. And you're just like, kind of not being creative or imaginative enough, and you're also not like doing that root cause analysis, right? That's another thing I say. So you're not thinking deeply enough, right? Okay, this is page 26 at the end of the first column. One way to make the work of provocateurs much more difficult is to be clearly committed to tactics that the state can't co-opt, nonviolent tactics. If an infiltrator wants to non-violently blockade or march or take out the garbage, well, that's useful to us. If an infiltrator sabotages us by recruiting others to commit mayhem, that's a comment on what such tactics are good for. A few people making decisions that affect everyone else is not what revolution looks like. It's what capitalism looks like. A violent revolution is therefore unlikely to bring about any fundamental change in human relations. Given the anarchists' respect for the sovereignty of the individual, in the long run, it is non-violence and not violence, which is implied by anarchist values. Okay, so that was just a little taste of the Anarchist Cookbook. This is actually a pretty dense book. It's got a lot of information here. I just gave you a little teaser, even though I've been talking for like over an hour. I just wanted to kind of give a more definitive definition of anarchism as a philosophy. right? Because it actually is a very detailed, in-depth, constructive, positive philosophy. Throughout the years, I have been trying to understand what anarchism is. I've always kind of been on the fence about anarchism throughout my years of doing activist work, and as I've been participating more and more in like community activism, right, I've been learning more about anarchism and understanding more about the positives of this political philosophy. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And there's a ton of other books and information that go deep into it. And I would encourage you not to rely or fall back to like very shallow or superficial interpretations or demonstrations of anarchism. Try not to get fooled by politicians who just blurt the word out and they really don't know what it means, or they're just using it in a derogatory term to just refer to people that they disagree with, or that just prop up their position or their interests, right? Using anarchism as a poster to like advertise what they want. Try to resist that and think more deeply about anarchism. Don't use Chat GPT. I forgot. I don't even know what the acronym is. I don't even use. Yeah, try not to use AI to like just blurt you out like anarchism. It'll just give you some random shit. Read some books is what I'm saying. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Feel free to comment. I know I haven't been active as much lately. I'm gonna try and get more active on the channel again. It's just I've been doing a lot of community activism, and it's really making me feel good. It's making me feel like, yeah, we can change the world. So I've been putting a lot more of my time in that. But we got to get back to some Black Ponderer videos, right? It's that, and also just random like normal ass life shit, homeowner stuff, and it's a lot of like adulting as well as preventing me from making videos. But we try to come back here. So anyway, I just want to give you an explanation if you've been listening this long. But thanks a lot. You've been watching The Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical talk.